Jerry, this is Jeff Hirsh live at the courthouse.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. You know, there had been some talk over the weekend. People were looking for some increased drama here, and I even heard this one scenario that all of a sudden the back doors would open and in would walk Pete Rose, you know, hand on the Bible, making his last plea to say, look, I never bet on baseball. Judge, give me 14 days to prove that Giamatti is in fact biased. That kind of theater is very unlikely, and what made me think about it is the fact that Dowd is not there today. In other words, they would have to tell the judge ahead of time what witnesses are going to show up. So obviously witnesses will not be there today. So I think it's going to be a cut and dry ruling one way or the other.
And there's also been a lot of talk over the weekend that perhaps Pete would hang it up today after this or whatever. But that isn't going to happen either. I think what we're going to see is a possibly long drawn out will depend on whether Judge Nadel grants the TRO. But it is not going to be quick and painless no matter what happens here.
This whole case has been nothing but a series of grand surprises. But Pete has stated unequivocally that regardless of what the decision is, he wants to be in baseball and he is not going to quit whatever happens. Let's now go to the courtroom where Judge Nadel apparently is getting ready to walk in. And there he is.
This court to be operating on Sunday, but I think it is clear that this is a highly unusual situation, to say the least. This is case number A8905178. It's Peter Edward Rose versus A. Bartlett Giamatti et al. Now, before we render our decision here today on the issue of whether to issue a temporary restraining order, I would just like to mention something about the attorneys involved in this case. The two lead trial counsel for the parties, Robert Stackler and Louis Hoynes, are not only great legal warriors, but they are two of the most honorable gentlemen that I have ever had the honor to work with in a very, very difficult situation. In addition, the other attorneys involved here for the plaintiff, William Seitz, Robert Pitcairn, Reuben Katz, Roger Makeley, and for the defendants, Lawrence Kamine, Jonathan Wolford, Gerald Weigel, Lawrence Ellman, Robert S. Martin, Mark McDonald, and K.C. Green, are also the highest cream of the legal crop. So perhaps it is fitting that we have such great talent in an unprecedented legal battle that may or may not be just beginning. Before we discuss specific issues involved, it should be pointed out that we are here at a very initial stage of the case. And as we all know, during the 2 days of evidence, we heard a lot of opinion, we heard a lot of hearsay testimony, and all of which, I might add, is proper at this early point. However, we did not hear from two of the key parties. That is, Peter Edward Rose and the Commissioner of Baseball, A. Bartlett Giamatti. We would like also to point out that a central issue at this time is not whether Peter Edward Rose did or did not bet on baseball, but rather we are here today deciding issues involving fairness, impartiality, and equity. I also would like to point out that any ruling that we make here today with reference to a temporary restraining order does not in any way forecast what might happen in any future hearing or proceeding before this court. In order for this court to issue a temporary restraining order, several determinations must be made, and we will begin here by making the determinations on the least difficult issues. Number one, if there is a hearing before the Commissioner of Baseball tomorrow, it is this court's judgment that the career of Peter Edward Rose will be irreparably harmed. Secondly, if we grant a delay here today of 14 days, neither Major League Baseball nor the public will be harmed. Thirdly, we must decide if we should even be here today. That is, should this court be sticking its nose into the affairs of Major League Baseball? As we all know, as counsel for all the parties very well know, courts are reluctant to interfere in matters of this sort because of the possibility that the floodgates of litigation will be opened. However, this court will never let that factor deter it from doing what is right and fair. And we now reach the most crucial and most difficult issue for this court to decide, and I might add, this issue involves the closest call for this court in this lawsuit so far. That is, has Peter Edward Rose established his claim for purposes of these proceedings that the Commissioner of Baseball is not an impartial and unbiased decision maker in baseball's proceedings against Mr. Rose? On this point, the strongest evidence for Peter Edward Rose is this letter, Exhibit G, and this is the letter that was written by the Commissioner of Baseball to Judge Carl Rubin on behalf of Ron Peters, and Ron Peters is Peter Edward Rose's chief accuser. I will now read the pertinent parts of this letter for purposes of these proceedings. And the Commissioner of Baseball to Judge Rubin says as follows: "It is my purpose to bring to your attention the significant and truthful cooperation Mr. Peters has provided to my special counsel, who is conducting the investigation into allegations concerning the conduct and activities of Pete Rose, the manager of the Cincinnati Reds baseball club." The Commissioner of Baseball goes on to say to Judge Rubin, "I am satisfied Mr. Peters has been candid, forthright, and truthful with my special counsel. It therefore appears to this court at this point that the Commissioner of Baseball has prejudged Peter Edward Rose. We further find that the hearing set tomorrow in New York before the Commissioner of Baseball would be futile and illusory, and the outcome a foregone conclusion. Accordingly, I here today grant Peter Edward Rose's motion for a temporary restraining order. The action I have taken here today has the following ramifications during the term of the temporary order, which is 14 days. Number one, Peter Edward Rose will not have a hearing tomorrow before the Commissioner of Baseball. Number two, no disciplinary action of any type may be taken against Mr. Rose for 14 days. Number three, Mr. Rose will remain as manager of the Cincinnati Reds in their employment for the next 14 days. In addition, the court hereby sets this matter for hearing on plaintiff's request for a preliminary injunction on July 6, 1989 at 10 a.m. And the court at this time would like to file the temporary restraining order with the clerk, Mr. Daffner. And here's an extra copy. Here are copies for counsel. Very well, the record should indicate we have now filed the temporary restraining order with the clerk. If counsel wishes to take up any other matters of scheduling, I will be available in chambers. I will only be available in chambers to counsel, to my staff, that is, my court reporter, Mrs. Womack, my constable, Mrs. O'Mara, or Mr. Donovan, my bailiff, or Mr. Daffner, the clerk. Very well, at this time, Mr. Donovan, if you would adjourn court.
And there you have it. Judge Nadel has just granted the temporary restraining order requested by Pete Rose's lawyers. That means the big meeting that was supposed to happen tomorrow in New York City between Pete and Bart Giamatti will not happen. Pete's lawyers asked it to be blocked because they say Giamatti has already made up his mind and cannot be fair to Pete. And apparently Judge Nadel has found reason to go along with that decision.
And the reasons being that he feels that Bart Giamatti has prejudged Pete. That is the major reason that he gave.
We should also point out that what he said, however, does not necessarily mean how he will rule on July 6th when the preliminary injunction hearing will be held. But for now, Pete Rose is still the manager of the Cincinnati Reds and must remain so for another 14 days. So now the judge has 2 weeks in which he must decide which action he will take ultimately, whether to issue a permanent injunction, and that will be the official decision banning Giamatti from the Rose investigation. But of course, baseball could appeal that decision. Tell you what, let's go to Jeff Hirsh, who's now standing by outside the courtroom. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, Jerry, the other day when Judge Nadel took this under advisement, he said that this case could put him into previously uncharted waters. Well, what happened today was he stuck his toe into those previously uncharted waters and then dove in head first. This is truly an historic decision, even though it postpones the real decision for just a couple of weeks. The key argument to baseball's case was not necessarily whether it had or had not the evidence against Pete Rose as of this time, but rather baseball historically has been able to operate on its own and do its own internal discipline. This, at least for now, has been put on hold. There were a whole lot of Reds fans here, Pete Rose fans, I should say, one of them sitting right next to me, a gentleman named Rick Carr, who was here the other day. You weren't even in the courtroom. You were sitting out here watching it. What is your reaction to what happened?
They wouldn't let us in, but from outside watching on the monitors, I'm thrilled to death. Pete, we're all Pete Rose fans here, and I think he needed this restraining order, and I think it's good for him and good for baseball.
Do you feel that Bart Giamatti is prejudiced against Pete Rose, or do you feel you heard John Dowd's evidence, you've read it? Do you feel that Pete Rose did some things he shouldn't have done?
I feel that the letter basically says that Giamatti is already made his judgment, and I'm still sticking on. It's hard with all the Dowd's evidence to stick on Rose's side, but I'm going to, because of what he said about putting his hand on the Bible and saying that, you know, he wants to get up there and testify that he'll be coaching the Reds for the next 10 years. So.
Well, he will be managing the Reds at least for the next 2 weeks. What happens after that, we don't know. There will be another hearing in 2 weeks. The key to Judge Nadel's decision was the letter that Bart Giamatti wrote to Judge Rubin, in which he said that Ron Peters, Pete Rose's chief accuser, had given candid and truthful information. Now, you saw Steve Farr's story a few minutes ago where he interviewed Frank DeFord, who did a very highly laudatory profile of Giamatti in Sports Illustrated a few weeks ago, and even Frank DeFord admitted that he thought that letter was a mistake. That was the key that Pete Rose's lawyers hit on. They spent an hour and a half going over that with John Dowd. Dowd defended himself, defended the letter, but basically that was the letter that hung it up. And we'll be back again in 2 weeks. This is Jeff Hirsh live at the courthouse.
Jeff, let me just try something, and I don't know if it's going to work. I see behind you Bill Cunningham standing. I understand Bill Cunningham spoke with Pete Rose this weekend. If you could, can you see him behind you? If you can just
Bill?
grab him.
Okay.
Just let me ask him one question.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay.
I'll relay the question.
Okay, I understand that he spoke to Pete Rose over the weekend rather extensively about what may or may not happen. I'd like to get his reaction to what Pete's going to do now.
Jerry asked that apparently you did talk to Pete over the weekend, and based on what he said then and what you've heard today, what do you think the reaction of Pete is? It's obviously he'd be happy, but what were his feelings going into this?
I think he was cautiously optimistic. He believed that this judge, under these circumstances in this building, where this building's located, and considering who Pete Rose is, would grant the TRO. And you and I have been around the courthouse for a while, and I think you and I understand that this particular judge is particularly sensitive to the wishes of the voters and or the fans.
Well, is this a classic case of the home field advantage? If this lawsuit was in federal court, let's say even in Cincinnati or in New York where Major League Baseball is located, would this not have happened the way it happened today? You can only guess, but is it a good guess?
Jeff and Jerry, Norma, you could line up 100 law professors, judges, lawyers. The vote would have been 99-1, and that one is the one that counts. Considered legal opinions would be that there is no way this judge can grant on these legal issues this particular relief. But as he said, this is a terribly unusual case. This is Pete Rose, and I think this judge would be hard-pressed not to grant the TRO because of his character and the kind of turmoil this city has gone through and the kind of personality of Pete Rose. And I think Pete asked for 14 days. He gave him about 11. And now the hearing in a couple of weeks will be dramatic. Giamatti's going to have to testify. Pete Rose, well, I spoke to Pete Rose's lawyers just before the proceeding, and they said Pete Rose would testify at the preliminary injunction hearing. We have all the issues of Mrs. Schott, of Steve Schott. We have the issues involving the complaint. As you know, and as Jerry knows, he's a lawyer, you can join the preliminary injunction with the trial on the merits. And one of the issues in the complaint is whether Pete Rose bet on baseball. And that could be the issue in 2 weeks, but you don't know. It depends how he limits it. But right now, the drama has just begun in this case.
Yeah, that's indeed the case. You know, people have referred to something like this as a media circus, and indeed it has been. But if Pete Rose and Bart Giamatti testify, this has just been a little carnival. The circus is yet to come. This is Jeff Hirsh live at the Hamilton County Courthouse.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. We may be getting back to you later on as we continue our coverage on what is a dramatic development. Norma?
Now, we sent Newswire's Michael Collins out to get some reaction from the baseball fans. He's live at a pregame brunch going on right now at Barleycorns, the yacht club in Newport. Mike, they just saw the rulings. What's being said there?
Well, Norma, you know, it goes without saying that Pete has helped put this city on the map, and he's part of us. And I think if you've noticed over the last couple of months, the national media has really pointed out that the people in Cincinnati have really put blinders on when it comes to Pete Rose and this entire controversy, that we've, you know, ignored the evidence and just stood behind Pete when things were saying that Pete was gambling. We've talked to some people here today, and they're not surprised by what they've just heard and seen on the television as far as the hearing goes. Is that right?
That's right.
Why not?
I'm not surprised, because in Cincinnati he couldn't lose. He just can't lose. Other than Cincinnati, he would have lost.
We talked before, and you're not surprised at the allegations either, are you?
No, I think Pete Rose is guilty. I don't have any doubt that he's guilty. I just don't see a person who bets football, basketball, track, goes to the racetrack. He also bets baseball.
What do you think?
He deserves a fair chance. I mean, he is guilty of gambling, but he shouldn't be penalized the rest of his life for baseball. Everybody makes mistakes. He deserves a fair chance to tell his side of the story.
There's been a couple of polls over the last couple of days asking whether or not Pete should resign. And they seem to be split right down the middle. Some people say he should, some people say he shouldn't. What do you think?
I think he should stick with it and fight the game. I believe all the pro athletes are involved in things like this, and everybody for his own.
Were you surprised when all these allegations came out?
Yes, I was. I think he's a phenomenal baseball player, and I think that he should have his chance to vindicate himself, though, even though these allegations have been put into the public eye.
Very quickly, one more question. Do you think he would have been prejudged had he gone to that hearing tomorrow with Giamatti?
He would have been out of baseball after tomorrow.
Yes, he would have, most definitely.
Some fan reactions, very just. Pete Rose is part of Cincinnati. Norma, Jerry?
All right, a lot of people with a lot of diverse opinions on this subject. Now, we've asked an expert in sports law to join us now for some perspective on all of this.
And Ed Goggin joins us again from Chase Law School. Ed, you surprised?
Not really, because I thought there was enough in the record to justify the decision.
I'm sorry.
Excuse us,
Let me interrupt you one more second.
Okay.
I just got word. Let's go back to Jeff at the courthouse. Jeff?
We have Robert Stagler here, Pete Rose's lawyer.
That we've made up our mind about Pete Rose's guilt or innocence. What would you like to tell them?
I think those people would like to see Pete Rose get a fair hearing on that issue before an impartial decision maker. And the reason we didn't put on any evidence regarding betting in this hearing, that wasn't the issue. The issue here was whether we were entitled to a hearing before a fair and impartial decision maker, whether Commissioner Giamatti was a fair and impartial decision maker, and the document that he signed is clear and unambiguous that he prejudged the charges made against
Flat out, John Dowd says his evidence has Pete Rose betting. Did Pete Rose bet on baseball?
When would you be able to put on your case?
The ball game.
What are you going to tell him now? You're going to be in touch with him.
The ball game is beginning right now.
Did Pete bet on baseball?
Pardon me.
Did Pete Rose bet on baseball? Well, as you can see, it's chaos here, and Mr. Stackler's trying to get out of here. He's going around our camera here, and I'm getting cut off here, left and right. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody to just go around here. This is live television. As you see it, it's somewhat chaotic, but that's the way things work. Robert Stackler, that was the man you were just hearing. Pete Rose's lawyer, the man who argued successfully to get the temporary restraining order, the man who hammered away at the letter that Bart Giamatti had written to the letter that John Dowd had written to Judge Rubin on behalf of Bart Giamatti, signed by Bart Giamatti, saying that Ron Peters, the chief accuser of Pete Rose, had told the truth. Ron Peters said that he was Pete Rose's principal bookie. Robert Stackler argued that that letter, which Judge Rubin was given from Bart Giamatti believing him, saying the hearing Monday could not be fair because Bart Giamatti was prejudiced, has made up his mind. Well, Judge Nadel agreed, and that's why this thing's been put off for a couple of weeks. This is Jeff Hirsh live at the courthouse, and Jerry, I must say, in the melee and the crowd crush, I've lost my audio, so if you want to ask me a question, give me 2 or 3 minutes to hook myself up and then come back to me. This is Jeff Hirsh live at the courthouse.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. He gets hazard pay for that type of thing. Now, we were speaking with an expert in sports law. Let's go back to that.
Ed, sorry for the interruption. You can understand what's going on today. 2 things strike me as being pretty interesting in this. The first is, up to now, we have constantly heard that this hearing is about whether or not Giamatti can be objective, whether he can be fair. But what Judge Nadel was saying is that now comes the hearing 14 days from now, or July 6th, actually, 10 days from now. In that hearing, the issue, for the first time, we are going to hear from Giamatti. We're going to hear from Pete Rose, because in this kind of a hearing, they can bring in the evidence. This may be the most dramatic of all.
I'm sure it is, but I'm not absolutely sure what you're saying is the way it's going to happen. Are we talking still about the issue of whether or not Giamatti has prejudged the case?
Yes, but
rather than whether or not Pete is guilty or innocent.
That's right, but now in determining whether or not Bart Giamatti can be a fair judge, they are going to talk about the kind of evidence that Bart Giamatti has in front of him and whether or not that was deduced fairly. In that kind of a case, they may have to bring Bart Giamatti to the stand. In other words, Judge Nadel may well say, okay, the only way I can find out if Bart Giamatti is going to be fair is if I can face him eye to eye and look at him and ask him these questions. Well, once Bart Giamatti starts bringing up some of the issues in this particular case, then it seems the door has been opened. And we, just as Bill Cunningham had said, we may very well see the issues joined in this preliminary injunction.
Well, as he's indicated, the hearing can be open to a full evidentiary hearing, so that, yes, Pete would be required to submit to cross-examination and things of that sort at that point.
One of the things you were talking about before the hearing started, and you turned out to be exactly right on, is the judge ultimately made his decision. In fact, his very first sentence almost seemed to be what we were talking about. He concluded at this point, without judging Pete Rose, whether or not he gambled or not, he determined that a 2-week delay would not irreparably harm Major League Baseball. But without granting the order, it could irreparably harm Pete Rose.
Well, because Rose would be subjected to lifetime suspension, a lifetime sentence. You cannot be associated with football, with baseball again, and that would never be put aside.
Has Judge Nadel opened up the floodgates? Has he created new law in his decision?
No, because these things have happened before, much as the Baseball Commission likes to pretend that these types of proceedings have never been interfered with in the past. They have.
Do you see this as more than a hometown decision? Is there any legal basis for what Nadel ruled?
I had sat through the 2 days of hearings, and I was convinced that Dowd's report was very much biased in favor of getting Pete off the field.
Why do you reach that conclusion?
He summarizes all of his evidence in the first 6 pages and concludes, in essence, that Pete was guilty of betting on baseball and Pete was guilty of betting on the Reds. Okay. Then he goes on to explain that in the next 219 pages.
Okay. There are people sitting at home that say, gosh, I've loved Pete all my life, greatest thing going. But their fingerprints on a betting sheet, wouldn't that prove it? What's wrong with that evidence?
Well, if they only have Pete's fingerprints on there, how did they get on there, and why aren't there anybody else's fingerprints on there? The person who supposedly took that information from Pete's house would have to have had his fingerprints on the document also, unless he did it without, had done something in advance, put on a pair of gloves to avoid his fingerprints showing up on that particular document.
So, in conclusion, you find that Judge Nadel's decision has merit?
I feel it does, yes.
Okay. Edgar, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Norma.
For those of you that have joined us late, let's reiterate what's going on here. What we're going to do now is 23 or 24 minutes ago, Judge Nadel rendered his decision. You would probably like to hear that again, so here it is.
Accordingly, I here today grant Peter Edward Rose's motion for a temporary restraining order. The action I have taken here today has the following ramifications during the term of the temporary order, which is 14 days. Number 1, Peter Edward Rose will not have a hearing tomorrow before the Commissioner of Baseball. Number 2, no disciplinary action of any type may be taken against Mr. Rose for 14 days. Number 3, Mr. Rose will remain as manager of the Cincinnati Reds in their employment for the next 14 days.
So this latest chapter in the Pete Rose controversy is now over, or perhaps should I say just beginning. And of course, our coverage of it is just beginning as well. We're going to be getting reaction from Pete. He's at the ballpark today.
And there's some poetry in that, because today is Old Timers Day. So Pete is spending a lot of time being with the people that were with him playing as part of his career. He at least has 2 more weeks as manager of the Cincinnati Reds. Now in 2 weeks, Judge Nadel will decide if he will issue a permanent injunction. So stay tuned for News 5 for complete reports as this story continues to develop.
And that is our special report for now. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Norma Rashid.
And I'm Jerry Springer. For more news, tune in at 6 o'clock. Good afternoon.
Pete's bet on baseball is now public. Judge Norbert Nadel had been keeping the document secret, saying it had private information about people not involved in the Rose case. But faced with an Ohio Supreme Court order to release the document today or justify why not, Nadel let it go.
In view of the time constraints given to us by the Supreme Court, we discussed this with counsel, I feel that we have no other alternative but to release the material, and as of 5 o'clock, this material will become a matter of public record.
Well, John London is in our newsroom right now, and he has a copy of the report that we just got a hold of. John?
Jerry, we have obtained a copy of it. As you say, it is a thick copy. It's volume 1 of 9 volumes. It is 225 pages. This is the report that Judge Nadel ordered released at 5 o'clock. And in it, it says, as John Dowd testified to during the past few days here in Cincinnati, that Pete bet on Major League Baseball and on the Reds. That is what baseball's investigator is saying. In fact, take a look here at part of the summary of the report, what Dowd says. The testimony, he says, and the documentary evidence gathered in the course of the investigation demonstrates that Pete Rose bet on baseball, and in particular on games of the Reds baseball club during the 1985, 86, and 87 seasons. Now, the report also goes into Pete's relationship with a man by the name of Michael Bertolini. Michael Bertolini, we are told, lives in New York, and the report says that he in turn placed bets on Rose's behalf with an unidentified bookmaker in New York City. Quoting from the report now, Rose's financial records reveal checks in the amounts described by Bertolini made out by Rose to fictitious payees. Rose denied placing bets with Bertolini and denied owing anyone money. He did, however, acknowledge that he sent 11 $8,000 checks to Bertolini, but said that those were for loans for payments to athletes for a baseball card show. Now, I want to read you just a brief portion of the report with regard to Ron Peters' testimony. It says here that Peters testified that he took bets from Pete during the period from late 84 to late 86 when he stopped taking Rose's action. He stated that Pete Rose bet on professional football, college basketball, and Major League Baseball, specifically on the Reds 85, 86, or specifically on Major League Baseball games 85, 86, 87, including games by the Reds. And then goes on to say that although Tommy Giosa usually placed the bets for Rose during this period, on 4 to 6 occasions, Rose contacted Peters directly. On one of these occasions, in 85 or 86, quoting from the report again, Pete Rose called Peters to place bets on baseball, including the Reds. Peters recorded the conversation, then played the tape back to Pete Rose. Rose became upset, asked why he had taped him. Peters explained to him that he wanted an insurance policy to make sure Rose would pay his gambling losses. The report concludes at that point saying the tape, however, cannot be located. In the back of the report, it lists 15 instances of corroboration of Ron Peters' testimony, including, it says, betting sheets obtained from Rose's home and found by an expert to be in Rose's handwriting. It says the betting sheets contain a listing of Major League Baseball games, including the games of the Reds, with the results. As I say, we just got this voluminous report just a short time ago. We're in the process of reading through it, and we'll have more information about what it contains later on tonight.
John, I understand that this report, just to put things into perspective so we don't go around convicting anybody here, this is what the John Dowd has come up with in his report. There is still the opportunity for Pete Rose to answer these allegations, and as I understand it, he's going to deny what's in the report.
Oh, absolutely, and that has been made pretty clear over the past few days in court, and also it is alluded to in here. As you read through, you see allegation, and then Dowd lists some of Pete's responses to that, and in every case, as in the case with Michael Bertolini in New York, he has denied it.
Okay, thank you very much, John. John London reporting from the newsroom. As we said, we just got hold of the report. It's 250-some-odd pages. It's going to take an awful long time to read. We will have more of a report on it as we study it more tonight at 11 o'clock.
Well, so now we finally are learning just what baseball has on Pete when the report is released now. And there are other developments in this as well. News 5's Jeff Hirsh joins us now live to show us how lawyers for Major League Baseball made a highly unusual move today to fight the latest ruling on Pete's favor. Jeff?
Well, Norma, as you know, Pete Rose was supposed to be in New York today, and Bart Giamatti was supposed to have John Dowd's 225 pages right in his hand and confront him with it. That didn't happen because Judge Norbert Nadel postponed everything. Nadel gave a temporary restraining order saying that the commissioner could not hold the hearing at least for a couple of weeks till Nadel decided whether it was fair for him or not. Major League Baseball went into court today, tried to overturn Judge Nadel's ruling, saying that Judge Nadel's decision was improper and illegal.
We further find that the hearing set tomorrow in New York before the Commissioner of Baseball would be futile and illusory, and the outcome a foregone conclusion.
And with that, Judge Norbert Nadel blocked today's scheduled meeting between Pete Rose and Bart Giamatti over Rose's alleged gambling. Nadel set another court hearing on the issue for July 6th. But today, baseball appealed, asking Judge Nadel's order be thrown out and that the showdown between Rose and Giamatti go forward as quickly as possible. Quote,
The image of a sport no longer capable of policing itself in a matter as serious as a manager betting on his own team's games could only erode public confidence and respect for the national pastime. The ability of the commissioner to protect the integrity of baseball, the purpose for which his office was created, is at stake, unquote. Baseball is trying to get a temporary restraining order suspended. Legal experts say that's not easy.
Very tough to appeal a granting of a temporary restraining order. They're going to have to exercise some mental muscle and go through some legal gymnastics to do that. But it's doable. Not usual, but doable.
Lawyers for Pete Rose have until Wednesday morning to file their paperwork. Then the Court of Appeals will decide.
Of course, it's unknown when the Court of Appeals will decide. Baseball is hoping it will decide before July 6th. One other thing, which is lost in all of this stuff with the report and with the baseball appeal, Pete Rose is also the subject of a federal grand jury investigation about taxes. So that's a whole other issue which has kind of been lost in all of this. But we must stress, as you have, Jerry, that Pete Rose maintains his innocence throughout. This is Jeff Hirsh live at the Hamilton County Courthouse.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeff. Of course, still on that part of it. Jerry?
Well, most of what's been happening to Pete Rose is going on in court and not on the baseball field, but that's where Pete is now, and Ken's here to tell us how things are going down at the stadium.
Reds and Dodgers began just a little while ago, last game in a 4-game set. Let's go to Tom Brenneman, who's standing by live right now. He had a chance to talk to Pete over the weekend. Tom?
Well, Kenny, today, as far as today is concerned, Rose was in a meeting for better than 3 hours with General Manager Murray Cook and his coaching staff. You get the feeling that a trade might be in the works in talking about baseball between possibly even the Reds and the Dodgers. We'll see about that a little bit later. Pete's not talking to anyone today, but yesterday he did get together in an exclusive News 5 interview with our lonesome George Vogel. Pete told George this whole mess has hurt his reputation and had a story to prove it.
Well, we were in L.A. Last week and a half ago, and we landed at the airport, and Jeff Ruby and his wife was with me, and my wife and my little boy, and we got in this cab, and there was an African driving, and he's been in this country for like 5, 6 years. And Jeff, I was sitting in the front with my son, and Jeff was teasing. He said, you know who Jeff Ruby is, a famous restaurateur in Cincinnati, Ohio? And the guy says, no, sir, I don't think so. He says, you know who Johnny Bench is? And the guy says, no, I don't think so. And we went about another 2 miles, and he said, you know who Pete Rose is? And the guy said, yeah, he's the gambler. And I said, yeah, and I'm gambling right now, riding in this front seat with you around this mountain here.
So obviously Pete Rose has maintained somewhat of a sense of humor. However, it doesn't all seem so funny when this gets going come July 6th. Live from Northern Kentucky, Tom Brenneman, News 5 Sports.
Okay, Tom, a trade, huh? How boring.
Yeah, baseball. Oh, well, we'll get back to you later, right?
Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti is watching these proceedings from New York, of course. In an interview about an hour ago, Giamatti told reporters he's not happy that Judge Nadel released baseball's confidential report.
I didn't decide to release the report. I wanted to keep the report absolutely confidential along with everything else. When it was the subject of the lawsuit, we had to file it in order to defend it. Once it was filed as a public document, eventually these things get released.
Other than that, Giamatti says he is not commenting on the appeal until the hearing is over.
Pulling your kid out of the Little League. The whole thing's starting to give more than a few of us a bad taste. Indeed, the lawyers have taken over baseball, and yesterday the Reds got more TROs than RBIs. It's crying shame, and it needn't be like this. It's time for less law and a little common sense. And see how easy this whole thing could be. I mean, what's the issue here? It's whether Pete bet on baseball or the Reds. And that's a no-no, and Pete knows it is. And there's a good reason for that, because if gamblers get too involved in the game, there'd be too much incentive to fix the games, and the integrity of baseball would be lost. So the rule's good. No betting on baseball. Well, did Pete bet on baseball? The investigator has put together his report. Pete now wants a chance to show that the report's all wrong. And he wants the case heard before an impartial judge. He doesn't think Giamatti's fair. He thinks he's already made up his mind prior to hearing Pete refute the evidence. Judge Nadel, at least to this point, agrees. Meanwhile, Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti says he is fair. He is impartial. He has not yet made up his mind about Pete. This is what the lawyers are arguing about. Well, is Giamatti biased or can he be fair? Well, how about a little common sense here? Why doesn't Giamatti simply say, look, I'm as honest and fair as the day is long. I have not already determined that Pete is guilty. But since the most important thing here is finding the truth and preserving the integrity of baseball as well as Pete's rights, I'd like to avoid even the appearance of having been biased. I'd like to lift the cloud that will inevitably hover over this case no matter what decision I now reach. So, I'll step aside here, agree not to hear this case, and we'll have baseball appoint somebody else or an agreed-upon panel to hear the evidence, maybe a former federal judge or even a former president. If Bart Giamatti would just say that, he'd be a national hero overnight. He'd have put the game ahead of his pride. Pete would have no excuse for not going ahead with the hearing. Both sides would be heard. The issue would be out of court. The question of Pete's betting finally settled. And once again, we could play ball. It'd be less dollars for the lawyers, but more common sense for the game.
Now, Cincinnati's News 5 tonight.
Good evening. The report which holds the future of Pete Rose is now out. And as its author John Dowd said it would, it says Pete bet on baseball. It says he bet on the Reds. Indeed, often to the tune of $2,000 a game.
The 225-page report compiled by the investigator for the commissioner's office bases its findings on a number of interviews, phone records, bank records, and betting sheets, which Pete strongly denies are his, and according to his attorneys, will be clearly refuted once the case is tried on its merits. Now, we secured a copy of the report late this afternoon. News 5's John London has been poring over it and joins us now in the newsroom. John?
Jerry, there is a lot in the report itself that makes for interesting reading, particularly the reference to Pete's bank records. The report says they show Rose wrote checks made out to fictitious people, sent them to a man in New York in order to pay off a New York bookie. But even after pouring through the report, it still seems to boil down to who you believe. A big chunk of the report, 72 pages worth, is a chronology of bets allegedly made by Rose during the first 3 months of the 1987 baseball season. According to Dave Morgan, an associate of Ron Peters, that is when Rose would win a lot of money, quote, near the beginning of the baseball season when Cincinnati was winning a lot of games. The key evidence, 3 betting sheets, said to be in Rose's handwriting, Paul all-time grades. Jerry?
John, you mentioned the betting sheets as evidence. Where did baseball get those betting sheets?
According to the report from Paul Janszen, who readily admits that he took them from Pete's home.
Wouldn't Janszen's fingerprints then be on the sheets too?
I suppose they would be. That is certainly an issue that Pete's attorneys will most likely raise, and they will also contend that Pete's handwriting is not on those betting sheets. They say they have their own handwriting experts who are ready to speak up about that when the time comes.
What do they say about the phone records that are in this report?
I would imagine they will probably say prove it. The report is replete with examples of calls that were made from Pete's home, from the hotel room, from the dugout, from Janszen's car phone. The report says betting records from Janszen and Peters detail Pete's gambling. He lost a couple thousand here on the Reds. He won a couple thousand here on the Yankees, etc. But here again, Pete's lawyers will most likely raise the issue of credibility on that one.
Okay, thank you very much. John London, who spent much of the evening poring over this report. We'll continue to look at it. I suspect we're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming days.
While everyone was focusing on the legal issues, Pete was keeping an eye on the Reds tonight.
News 5 sports director Ken Broo is down at the stadium with Pete tonight. He joins us now with a report on what Pete said.
It's been a busy night between the Reds and trying to read this thing.
You got that.
I can't remember what I've done other than that tonight. Through all this, Pete is trying to stay focused on the game. During the warm-up tonight, our photographers caught a glimpse of him, putting the troops through a little workout. And then later on, while the team worked on its first win in days. Now, when it was all over, Pete finally told reporters what he really thinks about this report.
No, it's such a biased report, it's unbelievable. But we'll face that. Because there's not a damn thing we can do about it. The laws of baseball are great, but they have to abide by the laws too. And we don't think they did, and that's why we went to court, because we feel he already made judgment. And me and my team evidently aren't the only people who feel that way.
Interesting change of posture for Pete Rose, who for so long said no comment and then was a little defensive, now seems to be firing back. You almost get the feeling that he feels they fired their best shot. Now it's time for him.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ken. Now, I talked with Pete's attorneys tonight, and he expects some negative public reaction, of course, to baseball's report, but he tells me he's confident he can refute every allegation in it, from betting slips to phone records. The major concern of the lawyers is getting a fair decision-maker to hear Pete's case.
Through all the recent legal maneuverings, Ron Peters, who calls himself Pete Rose's bookmaker, has been keeping quiet. But in an exclusive interview with News 5's Steve Forrest, the man known as Pete's chief accuser tells us he won't be the one to bring Pete down.
You're a student of baseball at this point, I'd imagine. You know about the Black Sox. You've also got to know that there are probably going to be people out there already who are saying that you will go down in history as the man who brought down Pete Rose.
Yeah, they're going to say that, but in fact, Pete's the one that brought down Pete Rose, not Ron Peter. He knew what he was doing.
Now, that is just part of what Peter's had to say, but because of an agreement we have with him, this is the only part of the interview we can show you tonight. Pete's lawyer made us promise not to air the full interview until 6 o'clock tomorrow. Please tune in to News 5 at 6 to hear the full exclusive interview. As for Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti, he says making the report public is the last thing he wanted to happen.
I didn't decide to release the report. I wanted to keep the report absolutely confidential along with everything else. When it was the subject of a lawsuit, we had to file it in order to defend it. Once it was filed as a public document, eventually these things get released.
Giamatti refused to answer reporters' questions about the legal maneuvering surrounding this whole battle with Pete.
Now, as far as the battle in court goes, here's where we stand. After Judge Nadel granted the temporary restraining order yesterday, lawyers for the baseball commissioner have now filed an appeal to the ruling. They say the hearing by Giamatti should take place as quickly as possible and that the integrity of the commissioner's office is at stake. Pete's lawyers have until Wednesday morning to file their paperwork. That's when the hearing on the appeal is scheduled.
And you're going to have some thoughts on this whole legal stuff later on. Coming up in these days, but what has all the hype done for the sale of his baseball cards and memorabilia? According to this Price Hill store, the 1989 Rose card is going fast in fear that this may be Pete's last year. Collectors say memorabilia and older Rose cards have been moving kind of slow. I hear those rookie cards going for something like $800 bucks. Yeah. Fantastic. That's all our time for now. Thanks for being here with us.
No, it's such a biased report, it's unbelievable.
Pete says he's not trying to change the rules of
Chief
baseball.
Marty Perret.
A little bit.
Good evening. All the gory details, the complete report on Pete Rose's gambling prepared by baseball investigator John Dowd is public tonight.
The 225-page summary came out last evening, as we showed you right here on News 5. And now all the documents that support the finding that Pete did bet on baseball, and it says on the Reds, are out in public for the first time.
It's a massive amount of paperwork, as we're going to be showing you. And News 5's Jeff Hirsh has spent the day combing through all of this material to bring you the up-to-now secret story of what baseball has on Pete Rose.
Well, Norma, here it is. I can't hold it all up because it's too heavy, but there's a lot of it here. It has allegations that Pete Rose was deep in debt to bookies and that he sometimes bet $2,000 a game, a direct contradiction to what Pete has been saying.
Well, it feels good to finally be able to look at the camera and say that I never bet on the Cincinnati Reds and I never bet on baseball.
Baseball's greatest hitter says he did not bet on the game he loves. But the 2,000-page-plus report from investigator John Dowd says he did big time. The 9-volume report was given out today. So much evidence it had to be carried in boxes. Investigator Dowd says he has the goods on Pete. Dowd says a handwriting analysis of betting records shows those slips were written by Rose. Here's one of the slips Dowd says shows Rose bet on baseball. Rose's name is in Ron Peters' betting records. Peters from Franklin, Ohio, has claimed to be Rose's principal bookmaker. Telephone records. Rose's phone bills show repeated calls from his house to sports score services, to ballparks, and to people baseball says made bets for Pete. 29 checks to fictitious payees totaling $227,000. Here are some of those checks. This one is to Bob Smith. Baseball says there's no such person, that someone who handled Rose's action used the checks to pay Pete's gambling debts. Rose denied any of that. In his deposition, he said the whole story was a blackmail effort by former friends. Quote, "It kind of seems to me that those fellows were all trying to link gambling to me because they were all in trouble with drugs. I'm talking about Peters, I'm talking about Mike Fry, Tommy Giosa, and Paul Janszen started probably in May of '88, and I can get you 3 or 4 people that he called." Dowd, okay. Rose, blackmail. He said he was going to tell the commissioner I bet on baseball. He was going to kill my wife. He was going to cripple my kids. But in testimony last week, investigator Dowd rejected that.
I have not been convinced of the allegation that it was blackmail.
Or extortion?
That's correct, sir.
Dowd said Rose had his buddies place bets for him. Quote, "In order to protect his stature as one of the most famous baseball players in Major League history, Pete Rose employed middlemen to place bets for him with bookmakers and at the racetrack and to pay gambling losses and collect gambling winnings, thereby concealing his gambling activity."
And, of course, depending on whether Pete Rose actually has his hearing or not with Bart Giamatti, he could be suspended for a year, he could be suspended for life, or he could be exonerated. That's in the situation if the hearing ever happens with Bart Giamatti.
Okay, so what's the latest on the court battles?
Well, Judge Nadel delayed the hearing. Baseball filed to overturn that. Pete's lawyers have until tomorrow to file their response to that.
So they'll be back in court tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock?
Documents will be. We don't know if a hearing will be. The hearing's probably not tomorrow.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. And Jeff will be back with more on the Pete Rose testimony at 6 o'clock. Clyde?
And, of course, this story is endlessly fascinating. News 5 sports director Ken Broo joins us now with the latest on the Pete Watch. Ken?
We have been following this closely, as you know, Clyde, as has everyone else, I think, in this country. Our Tom Brenneman is now down at the ballpark. Let's go live to him. Tom, what's the mood right now?
Mood is very relaxed, Ken, to be completely honest with you. I was in Pete's office for about 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, a little while ago. He's very calm, cool, collected, as the old saying goes. Players, likewise. Music in the clubhouse, kind of kicked back, taking it easy, getting ready for tonight's game, and they're more concerned right now about trying to make it 2 wins in a row than they are any of the outside distractions which surround them at this time.
Tom, you and I have done stories with players. We have talked to the players. They all seem pretty upfront in saying this isn't bothering them. But really, this has got to be getting old, I would think.
Well, I would think the thing that certainly gets old, if nothing else, is having hordes and just media everywhere you go and every time you come out to the ballpark. It was interesting. Tom Seaver had some comments on NBC this weekend about the fact that one of the most enjoyable things about playing the game is just the act of looking forward to going to the ballpark and being surrounded with your teammates. It can make it a little bit more difficult when you've got so many dozens of media people hanging around and trying to bring your mind elsewhere.
Yeah. Okay, Tom, thank you. Reds play the Braves tonight, 7:30 down at the big ballpark. Scott Scudder on the mound for the Reds. If we want to get into those mundane things, perhaps we'll wait until 5:50 when sports comes back.
Sounds like a good idea, Ken. Thanks a lot. As Ken said, the waiting and the wondering continues. We'll keep watching the story till it's finally done. Norma?
Well, now that the Pete Rose report is out for everyone to see, we were wondering if your opinions on the Reds manager have changed any. Here's what some of you said today.
I'm allowed to bet. You know, I don't lose my job. Rules are rules, but rules are made to be changed.
Oh, he said he didn't do it. You have to believe him until he's found guilty. That's all I can say.
I think if Pete Rose was gambling on his games that he shouldn't be in sports, and so he can gamble by himself.
But he probably did some betting. That's my opinion.
I say good luck, Pete.
We all know the Pete Rose saga has reached around the country, and today the question of gambling and baseball was pitched to the man in the White House. During a news conference today, President Bush made it perfectly clear how he feels about this Pete Rose thing.
I am not going to get into how that matter should be resolved. The baseball and national pastime has sound rules regarding betting on baseball games, and I simply am going to, I'm not going to get into that one.
No more questions about Pete Rose were asked during the news conference.
Well, as you can see, this story has received all kinds of national attention. And since it broke, so has Gamblers Anonymous. Since Pete's story came to light, the organization has received many more calls. News 5's Marty Peratt shows us how one local member sizes up this crisis in Pete's life.
If you believe this man, Ron Peters, Pete Rose is a man with a gambling addiction. Peters was a bookie, and he says Pete bet on baseball and the Reds while a player and a manager. This is Red. He's a member of Gamblers Anonymous. He says Pete seems like a man with a problem that won't go away.
Now, some compulsive gamblers, they gamble on one thing, you know, maybe the horses or bingo even, but, or the lottery. And, but then there are other compulsive gamblers, like myself at one time, that bet on anything. They need the continual action.
Baseball investigators say Pete was always looking for action from 1985 to 1987. They say betting records show Pete was making bets of up to $2,000 on the Reds and other baseball teams. Further evidence shows that Pete may have been betting on other sports. And his fondness for horse racing is well documented. One gambler says Pete may have been trying to fill a void that was left when he quit playing baseball. And as for allegations that bookmakers may have threatened to burn Pete's home or hurt his family, Red says local bookies wouldn't do that. But if Pete owed big money in a place like New York...
That's a different situation. I don't doubt from talking to friends in New York, it still happens in New York.
Up until now, people with gambling problems have pretty much remained anonymous. But if what the baseball investigator says is true, we will see how one man's gambling can do more than rock a family. It can shake up a whole city. Marty Peratt, News 5.
A spokesman for Gamblers Anonymous says compulsive gamblers should be treated like anyone else with a disease. They should be cared for. They should be given a second chance.
Now as for the legal battle that is still ahead in Pete's case, here's what happens next. First, you may know lawyers from Major League Baseball have filed an appeal to overturn the temporary restraining order. Pete's lawyers have until tomorrow to respond to that appeal. If the Court of Appeals does not overturn the restraining order, both camps will be back in the courtroom July 6th, when hearings will begin on whether to grant a preliminary injunction and get Giamatti off the Rose case altogether. Difficult to follow, but we're Baseball's report into Pete Rose's alleged gambling is out, and it is massive. We're not just talking about the 225-page report issued to the commissioner. We're talking about all the paperwork gathered in the entire investigation. Here's a quick overview of what the Rose report contains. 9 volumes of documentation. That's more than 2,000 pages. Testimony from witnesses, including Pete Rose himself. Phone records and betting sheets, which investigators say prove Pete Rose bet on baseball, including the Cincinnati Reds. Throughout the report, Pete maintains he did not bet on his own team or any professional baseball games.
Now, we want to stress to you just how detailed this report is. It is 9 volumes, and what's new today is that we now have Pete's actual testimony in the investigation. We've been going through this report all day, and News 5's Jeff Hirsh shows us how Pete denies the strong evidence against it.
The 2,000-page-plus report was carted away by the waiting media this morning. The documents contain what baseball investigator John Dowd says is evidence Pete Rose bet not only on baseball, but on the Reds. There are phone records, checks, and betting sheets, which baseball says are in Pete Rose's handwriting. John Dowd asked Rose about that. Dowd: and again, I want to ask you, Pete, if that is your handwriting, printing. Rose: I've never seen this. Dowd: Pete, I have a handwriting expert that examined your writings in 1987, and he has concluded that's your handwriting. Rose: all I can tell you is what I know. I can't disagree or agree with him. I mean, I never seen that before. Baseball says Rose was thousands of dollars in debt to bookmakers. Rose denied it. I'm going to say this one more time. I don't owe anybody a dime. New York, New England, New Mexico, a dime, nothing. Rose says the whole gambling story was a concoction of some former friends who were trying to blackmail him. Quote, those guys could have a quintet in the last 3 months because they're all singing. They're all singing a lot. They have to sing or they'll be in Sing Sing. In trying to block a hearing before Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti, Rose says all he's asking for is an impartial arbitrator to decide, and that Giamatti is prejudiced.
We feel that through this whole investigation that the commissioner's office was always here looking down at us. All we're trying to do is just the way baseball is played, or football is played, or basketball is played. We want to be on the same field with them where we have a chance.
Rose's lawyers say that now that the report is public, people will be able to read it and understand their claims. The investigation has not been even-handed, and Clyde, that Bart Giamatti's action would have been a foregone conclusion.
In other words, what they're saying then is what we read in here has already been skewed by the prejudice of Bart Giamatti and the people who put this report together for him.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, although I feel like one after he sat through this and read this. But there is what seems to me to be a lot of hearsay in this. In other words, somebody heard something or overheard something or heard somebody on the phone. And the question is, would that be admissible in court as opposed to before the commissioner? And I think that's why Pete Rose's people want to get this into court and out of the commissioner's hands, because they might be able to get some of this evidence excluded.
All right, Jeff, this, as we said earlier, continues to get more complicated.
It's not over yet.
You have to read through this.
Right.
All right, thanks a lot. Norma?
Well, some of the key evidence in the gambling report on Pete was supplied by the man who says he was Pete's main bookie, Ron Peters. News 5's Steve Forrest talked with Peters in an exclusive interview. Here in his lawyer's office in Franklin, he showed us betting slips he says are from Pete Rose and described how he took bets from Pete on the phone.
Well, I'd pick up the phone, I'd say hello, and he would say, yeah, this is Pete. So I would proceed to, that's when he called, of course, and I would proceed to give him the line, and then after that, he would proceed to give me who he wanted to bet on.
And the phone call would last very short time?
Very short time, briefly. Right. Strictly business, nothing more.
Did he use Pete? He didn't use a code name or anything?
Even though he had a code number, as everybody else did, his number was 14. He would always call.
That's specific.
Right.
That's for a reason.
So he would remember. So, yeah, he would just call and say, yeah, this is Pete, which he has a very distinct voice anyway, so.
We pick out a sheet that you say is a Pete Rose betting sheet.
That's correct.
Chances are pretty good that it was not Pete that you talked to place that bet.
That's right.
Who called?
Well, most likely Janszen in Pete's behalf. So this is Saturday, July 11th, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 baseball bets from anywhere from $500 to $2,500, one being the Reds for $2,500. And this particular day, you won $5,650.
Did you feel strange taking a bet from Pete Rose, knowing that if he got caught, it could mean the end of his career?
No, he's a big boy. He knew what the results were. It was his decision to make, so I didn't feel like that I should have any remorse taking the bets, no.
Peters will be heading to prison around the middle of next month to serve a 2-year jail term on a drug and tax evasion conviction. Meanwhile, Peters' testimony to baseball investigators is part of the hottest reading in town. The Dayton Daily News published the full text of the baseball commissioner's report in today's edition. As you can see, the lunchtime crowd on Fountain Square was reading every word. Now, this is a copy of the report. It was selling on Fountain Square today for 50 cents a copy. Clyde? The score is now Pete 2, Bart nothing.
Pete Rose today won his second court decision in less than a week, this time in Ohio's 1st District Court of Appeals.
News 5's Jeff Hirsh has been following every twist and turn in this saga. He's in our newsroom now with the latest. Jeff?
Remember, the appeals court today acted on narrow technical grounds, but the bottom line is the commissioner of baseball still cannot hold a hearing yet on Pete Rose's alleged gambling.
It was the battle of the legal briefs this morning. Lawyers for both Rose and baseball handing in arguments. Rose their first in the appeal, baseball their second. It was all about Sunday's decision by Judge Norbert Nadel to temporarily block Commissioner Bart Giamatti's disciplinary hearing for Pete. Baseball asked the appeals court to throw Nadel's order out and let the hearing happen at once. Quote, the commissioner must, in the exercise of his duties to Major League Baseball, be permitted to hear the allegations against Mr. Rose promptly. Anything other than a prompt resolution would severely damage baseball. But Rose's lawyers said the opposite. Quote, defendant's assertion that Giamatti must act immediately to protect baseball from the evils of gambling simply proves the substance of Pete Rose's claims in this action. Defendant's repeated statements that baseball will be harmed by maintaining the status quo for this short period clearly show that Giamatti and Major League Baseball have determined that Pete Rose bet on baseball without even hearing Pete Rose's evidence and witnesses. Rose's lawyers also argued that Judge Nadel's order was a temporary restraining order which cannot be appealed, and the appeals court agreed.
It is the order of this court that the within appeal is dismissed for the reason that the order from which order appealed from is not either a final judgment or final order which may be reviewed.
So right now, cutting through all that legalistic wording, the next step is the hearing before Judge Nadel on July 6th. That's to decide if Bart Giamatti or the courts will ultimately hear the Pete Rose case. Norma?
Jeff, what does Giamatti and his people in baseball say about this?
Well, baseball lawyer Lou Hoynes is saying that it was a technical issue on which this appeal was decided. Baseball feels they are right, but they have not said yet what they're going to do next. Will they go to the Ohio Supreme Court? Will they try to win in Nadel's court next week? They're still thinking about that.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeff. You almost need a scorecard to keep track of the legal issues here. Clyde?
Well, meanwhile, Pete Rose has again hit the pages of Sports Illustrated, and the cover, too. The new issue features a story on Pete and how he stands in John Dowd's report. It also includes quotes from Ron Peters, who claims to have made heavy-duty bets for Pete. The 12-page article mentions all the key players in the report, like Paul Janszen and Tommy Giosef. Cincinnati Reds fans also made the pages of SI, showing their support for Pete. Well, the fans do seem to be holding on to hope for Pete and standing behind him. News 5 sports director Ken Broo is here with the latest on how Pete is holding up in all of this, Ken.
Well, probably Pete would tell you today that this is so many issues now that he's been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He has the count. It's like 15 or 16 or something like that.
Too bad he doesn't own stock or something, huh?
Well, yeah, too bad he doesn't. He may when it's all over. You know, Pete, throughout this whole thing, has said that he wants to do is just play ball. And although he's maintained his innocence for the most part, he hasn't said much. Our George Vogel, who is a man of many words, is down at the stadium where the Reds take on the Braves tonight. George, is Pete saying anything right now?
It's pretty much status quo, Ken. Before the game, as has Pete's done, Pete has done in the past. He hasn't said much before the games. Pretty much the case today. I saw him in his office just a few minutes ago. He said he didn't want to comment on today's court ruling, but he did say he was in no way surprised by what happened. What the people are talking about down here more than anything are the Reds' injuries. You know, Chris Sabo going on the disabled list today. That seems to be a bigger concern for Pete than the court case right now.
Okay, George, thanks. I hope you get a ticket and you can get in the game tonight, okay?
I'm working on it out here on the plaza level.
All right.
Okay.
We'll have more sports coming up later on, and of course, we'll continue to watch the ongoing saga that exists in the courtroom and on the playing field for Peter Edward Rose.
All right, Ken, thanks a lot. And we should remind everybody here that the game will be seen on Channel 5 tonight at 7:30.
Marty Perret.
Good evening. Major League Baseball is deciding what to do next after its second courthouse loss to Pete Rose in less than a week. News 5's Jeff Hirsh reports the Court of Appeals refused to let Commissioner Bart Giamatti's hearing with Pete take place now.
The order speaks for itself. This is the court's order.
This is the order, and it's a victory for Pete Rose. On Sunday, Judge Norbert Nadel temporarily blocked Commissioner Giamatti's hearing on Rose's alleged gambling. The commissioner appealed, trying to get Nadel's order thrown out so the hearing could take place now. But he lost. The appeals court said Nadel's order stands. Something important to keep in mind. The appeals court decision has nothing whatsoever to do with whether Pete Rose did or did not bet on baseball. All the appeals court said is that Judge Nadel issued a temporary restraining order, and temporary restraining orders just cannot be appealed. Legal experts are not surprised at today's decision.
A TRO is a preliminary step in a piece of litigation, and if courts intervene during the middle of litigation, you'd see a little end to a dispute.
Baseball attorney Lou Hoynes said the Court of Appeals ruling was on narrow technical grounds, and baseball still feels Judge Nadel was wrong. Quote, "It continues to be our contention that the restraining order was improperly granted, and the trial court had no authority to interfere with the ongoing processes of the commissioner, which are necessary to protect the integrity of Major League Baseball." So as of now, the Pete Rose case is scheduled back before Judge Nadel again July 6th to see if Bart Giamatti or the courts will ultimately decide Pete's fate. Baseball may do something else in court before then, it may not. But court cases rarely end quickly. We're only in the bottom of the first, with 8 more innings of litigation yet to come. Jeff Hirsh, News 5.
Now, among baseball's options, taking today's decision to the Ohio Supreme Court or trying to win before Judge Nadel, that's next week. No decision yet on what they're going to try.
Well, while the Pete Rose drama continues to play out in the courts, it is hot off just about every press. Pete is back on the cover of this week's Sports Illustrated, and the article contains more dirt about Pete's relationship with his main accuser, Ron Peters. News 5's John London joins us now with some of the highlights. John?
Well, I have the SI magazine right here. It's the new one, a 12-page story about the Rose case, much of it an account from Peters about how he handled Rose's action. Some of it more the same, some of it covers new ground, like an allegation that Rose was being ripped off when he made bets whether he won or lost.
Tommy Giosa, who ran bets for Rose, supposedly told Ron Peters early on, "You're going to love this guy's action," meaning Pete. "All he does is lose. You're going to make a fortune." In a new Sports Illustrated article, here's what Ron Peters says about Tommy G. Quote, "He bragged to me that he was cheating Pete." Peters tells SI he agreed to pay Giosa 10% of Pete's net losses, fearing he might take Rose's gambling business elsewhere if he didn't. Peters says Rose was being ripped off by Giosa, who was, according to Peters, lying to him about the betting lines. Quoting from the article, Rose would think he had lost, and Giosa would pocket the winnings without Rose's knowledge.
Well, I'd pick up the phone, I'd say hello, and he would say, "Yeah, this is Pete."
In an interview with News 5's Steve Forrest last week, Peters said he always insisted on being paid off in cash.
Even though I thought the checks were good, I just assumed to have cash instead of any written documents to get myself in trouble.
Of course, Peters got himself into a whole lot of trouble, recently sentenced to 2 years in prison for tax evasion and dealing cocaine. He now tells Sports Illustrated he would carry a gun with him on payoff trips because he didn't trust Giosa.
All right, so the magazine is out on the newsstands now. How's it selling?
Not a mad rush yet, but keep in mind it just got there today. They just literally put it on the shelves today, so we'll have to see. Certainly, people are interested in reading and hearing and listening to anything about Pete right now, so I imagine it'll sell well.
So I guess if you want one, better get it quick. Yeah. All right, John, thanks a lot. Norma?
No surprise whatsoever that the plot thickens again.
Media, Bill?
Dan, Cleveland Browns...
Football Commissioner Bart Giamatti and an investigator in the case, Pete Rose's case, John Dowd, are wrapping up a meeting right now in Washington. They're not yet saying what, if anything, they've decided in the case. Also, Major League Baseball has apparently not yet decided whether to go to the state Supreme Court to get a meeting between Pete and the commissioner, or just gear up for another session before Judge Nadel 1 week from today. And this, News 5's Jeff Hirsh shows us there's now talk of changing a street named after Pete.
September 11th, 1985, Pete Rose smacks out hit 4192, breaking Ty Cobb's all-time record. September 12th, 1985, Mayor Charlie Lucan unveils the new name for 2nd Street, Pete Rose Way. June 22nd, 1989, baseball investigator John Dowd says Pete bet on baseball. Today, letters to the editor question if Pete Street should remain. Is the bloom off the Rose way, that is?
Visitors coming in, seeing Pete Rose Way, give a, kind of a negative connotation towards our city. I think they should change it to something more appropriate.
But actually, that does not seem to be what most people think, at least most people we talked with. Their feeling is Pete got his street for batting, not for betting, and it should stay that way. After all, this is a man who would not even walk to first base after ball 4, he ran.
Keep it there, you might as well. I mean, he did do a lot for Cincinnati, you might as well keep it there. No need to punish him any further by taking away his street.
City Council named 2nd Street Pete Rose Way. Will Council change that name back? No.
We named it after Pete Rose because he got more hits than anybody in baseball. He's still got that accomplishment, and I think you've got to let kind of history play this out before you'd make any decision to reverse yourself.
Obviously, the Pete Rose saga is a serious one. Reputations and careers are at stake. But hey, we're talking about a street name here. So what about this? Leave Pete Rose Way as it is. Change 3rd Street to John Dowd Boulevard. Change Mering Way to Norb Nadel Avenue. And have Litigation Lane connect them all.
But he gave Pete Rose football scores smack in the middle of baseball games. Franco's name and that of another local baseball figure, Marty Brenneman, are buried deep in the 2,000-page John Dowd report on Rose's alleged gambling. News 5's Jeff Hirsh reports on this latest twist in this unfolding saga.
Today's New York Daily News, John Franco's hometown paper, says Franco admitted giving football scores to Rose during baseball games. The article says Franco told the Dayton Daily News he checked the sports ticker in the clubhouse during games. Franco is quoted as saying he knew Rose was a big gambler, but Franco is also quoted as saying he did not know anything about Pete Rose betting on baseball. I spoke with Franco about this in person earlier today. He did not want to go on camera, but he denied making those comments to a newspaper reporter, and he also told me, quote, I never gave scores to Pete. Franco added, that's not true. I don't know anything about it. I wish you people would clear my name. I would never do anything like that. Franco's name comes up in the John Dowd report on Rose's alleged gambling. It comes in an interview with Paul Janszen, one of Rose's chief accusers, who says Franco knew about Rose's gambling. Also in Janszen's interview, the name of Reds broadcaster Marty Brenneman as someone who allegedly knew of Pete as a bettor. Brenneman tells me he's not happy he's in the report. He says he knew Pete bet on football and basketball a couple of years ago, though he does not know if it was legal or illegal. But Brenneman says he never knew of Pete betting on baseball.
Well, I think that it'll be proven that Paul Janszen has told a lot of untruths if this thing can stay in a court of law. I have no knowledge whatsoever firsthand or from conversation that Pete Rose has ever bet on a baseball game, including the Reds.
And Brenneman says it's curious that while his name is in the report, baseball investigators never interviewed him, a person who sees Pete Rose every day of the season. Jeff Hirsh, News 5.
Next Thursday's scheduled hearing is still on before Judge Norbert Nadel. No decision yet from Major League Baseball on any further court efforts to let Commissioner Bart Giamatti hold his hearing instead. In the meantime, Cincinnati Reds owner Marge Schott is in the hospital right now. A spokeswoman for Jewish Hospital tells us she is likely to remain there overnight. Mrs. Schott, seen here at events from earlier in the year, was brought to the hospital by private car at around noon. Since then, she has been undergoing what the hospital describes as routine unscheduled tests. However, the hospital stresses that she has not suffered a heart attack. But he gave Pete Rose football scores smack in the middle of baseball games. Franco's name and that of another local baseball figure, Marty Brenneman, are buried deep in the 2,000-page John Dowd report on Rose's alleged gambling. News 5's Jeff Hirsh reports on this latest twist in this unfolding saga.
Today's New York Daily News, John Franco's hometown paper, says Franco admitted giving football scores to Rose during baseball games. The article says Franco told the Dayton Daily News he checked the sports ticker in the clubhouse during games. Franco is quoted as saying he knew Rose was a big gambler, but Franco is also quoted as saying he did not know anything about Pete Rose betting on baseball. I spoke with Franco about this in person earlier today. He did not want to go on camera, but he denied making those comments to a newspaper reporter, and he also told me, quote, I never gave scores to Pete. Franco added, that's not true. I don't know anything about it. I wish you people would clear my name. I would never do anything like that. Franco's name comes up in the John Dowd report on Rose's alleged gambling. It comes in an interview with Paul Janszen, one of Rose's chief accusers, who says Franco knew about Rose's gambling. Also in Janszen's interview, the name of Reds broadcaster Marty Brennaman as someone who allegedly knew of Pete as a bettor. Brennaman tells me he's not happy he's in the report. He says he knew Pete bet on football and basketball a couple of years ago, though he does not know if it was legal or illegal. But Brennaman says he never knew of Pete betting on baseball.
Well, I think that it'll be proven that Paul Janszen has told a lot of untruths if this thing can stay in a court of law. I have no knowledge whatsoever firsthand or from conversation that Pete Rose has ever bet on a baseball game, including the Reds.
And Brennaman says it's curious that while his name is in the report, baseball investigators never interviewed him, a person who sees Pete Rose every day of the season. Jeff Hirsh, News 5.
Next Thursday's scheduled hearing is still on before Judge Norbert Nadel. No decision yet from Major League Baseball on any further court efforts to let Commissioner Bart Giamatti hold his hearing instead. In the meantime, Cincinnati Reds owner Marge Schott is in the hospital right now. A spokeswoman for Jewish Hospital tells us she is likely to remain there overnight. Mrs. Schott, seen here at events from earlier in the year, was brought to the hospital by private car at around noon. Since then, she has been undergoing what the hospital describes as routine unscheduled tests. However, the hospital stresses that Giamatti has been moved to Columbus. News 5's John London is here to explain why. John, what's going on?
Well, it's been moved because baseball's attorneys today asked for and got a change in the playing field, at least temporarily. Keep your eye on the baseball now as I give you a play-by-play of the off-field maneuvering. As Pete autographed baseballs prior to the start of a 3-game series in Philadelphia, his case was on the move. Judge Norbert Nadel has had a grip on it for nearly 2 weeks, temporarily blocking Commissioner Giamatti from deciding if Pete is guilty of gambling on baseball. But Giamatti's lawyers have filed papers shifting the case into federal court, away from Cincinnati. They say since Giamatti doesn't live in Ohio, a state court should not have jurisdiction. In agreeing to a federal hearing in Columbus, Judges Carl Rubin and Herman Weber wrote, "While we entertain substantial doubt that this matter is removable to the federal court, the technical requirements appear to have been followed." On Wednesday, Pete's lawyers are expected to file papers of their own to move the case back home, back before Judge Nadel. But right now, the ball belongs to federal Judge John Holshoe of Columbus. He will decide where Pete's case belongs. For now, it is in legal limbo. The courts, of course, are closed tomorrow for the holiday, so it will be Wednesday at the earliest before a ruling is made. What was expected to be a big showdown hearing before Judge Nadel is right now on hold.
Now, are the lawyers preparing as if it's all done?
This is News 5 at 5:30 with Jerry Springer, Norma Rashid, Pat Berry's weather, Ken Broo with sports, and Northern Kentucky Bureau Chief Marty Perret.
Good evening. Another delay tonight in the Pete Rose gambling case. The answer to who will judge Pete has been pushed back for at least another 12 days.
Baseball lawyers want the case handled in federal court. Pete's lawyers want it decided in Hamilton County Court. And the Columbus judge, who has to decide one way or the other, says he won't decide until at least July 17th. News 5's Steve Forrest is in Columbus. He joins us now live. Steve?
Norma, you want a bottom line on this. It's that Pete is apparently safe through at least the All-Star game. There is no way he's going to be tossed out of baseball or even reprimanded through at least July 20th. And his lawyers are working like crazy to make sure that it never happens.
Rose's lawyer, Robert Stackler, arrived at the courthouse shortly after noon, saying nothing.
No comment at this time.
But in a 2-hour private meeting, he and lawyers for both baseball and the Reds worked out an agreement with a federal judge to keep Rose on the job while they decide in which court his case against Giamatti belongs. Here's what it says. Giamatti won't hold any hearing for at least the next 2 weeks on whether Rose should be kicked out of baseball for allegedly gambling on baseball games, including those of the Reds. And the Reds agree they won't fire or suspend him while the federal court decides if it should send the case back to Hamilton County Common Pleas Judge Norbert Nadel.
Bob, are you pleased that the stipulation is there?
Yeah.
Until at least
Tell me
the
why.
17th.
Because it preserves the status quo and it gives Judge Holshoe an opportunity to decide the case and to review the briefs and the law.
And you can go forward without any worry that Rose is going to be suspended or fired once the Judge Nadel's TRO expires.
The stipulation will speak for itself, and they have agreed not to take any action.
Now, both sides still have to file legal papers. The last papers are due on July 17th. That's 12 days from now. And then Judge John Holshoe says he will take the matter under advisement. So this matter has the potential to drag out through the rest of August, very likely into rest of July, very likely into August, quite possibly until October in the World Series. Not good news any way you look at it. Reporting live from Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. And we're preparing more on this latest development and local reaction to it. We'll have that coming
Pete Rose might have his case decided by federal court or by state court, that's Judge Nadel, or by the commissioner. There will ultimately be a decision maker, but some fans have already made up their minds.
I think it's obvious that he's guilty, and it doesn't matter right now anyway. So I believe it should be out of the city of Cincinnati because there's too much public favoritism towards him anyway.
The guy's been framed. You know, I'd like to see him get off.
Other than Pete Rose and Bart Giamatti, the person most affected by this delay is perhaps Judge Norbert Nadel. I contacted the judge's office this afternoon. They had not even gotten official word of the delay from Columbus. But that delay is official, and so the judge will have to wait, along with Pete, along with Bart, along with the fans, and along with a host of lawyers. Jeff Hirsh, News 5.
To recap what's happened today, a federal judge in Columbus has decided to delay his decision on whether a federal court or a Hamilton County court will hear Pete's case. That means a hearing before Hamilton County Judge Norbert Nadel, set for tomorrow, is now canceled. Judge Nadel was scheduled to decide on a preliminary injunction.
Playing figures because of his alleged gambling habits.
Specifically with a bookie who may have been a member of the New York's Bonanno crime family. News 5 Steve Forrest is in our newsroom to tell us investigators are busy checking out this latest link. Steve?
Yeah, Norma, this gets more and more disturbing every day. Today, NBC reports that sources have identified the bookie named in the report as Val, a bookie to whom Rose reportedly owed thousands of dollars. Now, while Rose denies dealing with him, NBC says the bookie has direct ties to the mafia. NBC says this man is Val. Richard Troy, a New York bookie indicted earlier this year on gambling charges, along with 33 other men. Rose's former friend, Paul Janszen, says he placed bets with Troy on behalf of Rose. Phone records show Janszen made repeated calls to a number which Troy used in mid-1987. Even more significantly, when police raided Troy's home last October, they seized 2 phone books and a Rolodex. A source familiar with the police investigation says one of the books had the inscription Paul-Rose and listed phone numbers for both Janszen and Janszen's mother. That's important because John Dowd's report into Rose's alleged gambling says Janszen's mother got a phone call threatening her son's life unless he paid off Rose's $68,000 gambling debt to Val. The source says, quoting, "This finishes the loop, meaning it provides a final tie between Rose, Janszen, and Troy." Now, when it is interviewed with John Dowd, Rose denies knowing who Val is. That is the same interview where he admits using a bookie to place football and basketball bets, despite his public statements that he never used a bookie to bet on any sport. Norma?
And then he continues to say he never bet on baseball.
That's right. He says he bet on football, the Super Bowl. He said he bet on the NCAAs 2 years ago, but he says he never bet on hockey, and he definitely...
To be done in as professional and, as I say, impartial and fair a manner as humanly possible.
Was it a shock?
It has so many ways in which it is now reminiscent of a job I used to have in another place that I sometimes wonder what has been gained in the swap. So it isn't a question I ask in the sense of, oh my goodness, what am I in? I have a very strong sense of what I'm in, and therefore perhaps I ask it.
Has gotten even more complicated. Lawyers for Baseball Commissioner Bart Giamatti have just filed papers in federal court, suggesting Giamatti is the one who won't get a fair shake if the case is sent back to a county court here. News 5 Steve Forrest is live at the stadium. Steve, this is a new approach they're taking.
Yeah, definitely a new approach. The lawyers for Giamatti are fighting back very hard. They're trying to convince that federal judge in Columbus that he should keep the case and not return it back here to common pleas court. They say if the judge is interested in true fairness, it's the only decision he can make.
One way or the other.
Last night before the All-Star game, Giamatti took the hard line, saying there's no way he'll step aside as judge and jury in the Rose affair.
Bart, at any time, have you considered withdrawing from the investigation?
Me? Absolutely not. No. No.
At any time, was there a compromise solution offered to Pete Rose?
No. No.
And today, his lawyers took the hard line, saying the Rose case should be heard in a federal, not state court. They say the commissioner has the right to investigate and decide whether Rose bet on baseball games, saying gambling is the capital crime of baseball. It infects the game's integrity and sickens honest participants and fans. They're also questioning whether Norbert Nadel, the judge who said Giamatti might be prejudiced against Rose, may be prejudiced himself in favor of Rose. They cite the order from federal Judge Carl Rubin transferring the case to Columbus because of Rose's local fame and notoriety. Plainly, they say, this same local prejudice must weigh much more heavily on a state court judge who must be elected and re-elected by the citizens. If ever it were appropriate to remove a case to the federal court to avoid such local pressures, Giamatti's lawyers conclude, this, they say, is the case. The ultimate issue in the case, say the lawyers for Giamatti, is the commissioner's ability to protect the integrity of baseball. Reporting live from Riverfront Stadium, Steve Forrest, News 5.
I suspect Rose and his lawyers, of course, would disagree.
Yeah, I think that's a real safe assumption, Jerry. As a matter of fact, it's their turn now to respond to the legal brief that was filed today. Those papers have to be filed up in Columbus by next week, next Tuesday, I believe. And at that point, next Monday, rather, at that point, Judge Holshoe will get to make the final decision. Don't expect a quick one,
Commissioner Bart Giamatti should...
Rose's chief
Columbus lawyers for both Pete and professional baseball met late today with a federal judge. News 5's Steve Forrest is there. He joins us now to tell us there are still no concrete answers to the question of what happens next.
Yeah, no concrete answers, Norma, but plenty of legal maneuvering today in a courtroom here in Columbus. You know, this case is getting so bogged down in legal minutia that sometimes we tend to forget why we're even here. At stake is whether Rose's case against Giamatti should be heard in a state or federal court. All of it following the report from Special Investigator John Dowd, where he concludes that Rose bet on baseball games, including those of the Reds. Dowd was in Columbus today, as were lawyers for both sides. They came to federal court to present their latest arguments to Judge John Holshoe. Baseball's lawyer said the case should be moved. Lewis Hoynes telling the judge Giamatti is viewed with suspicion in Cincinnati as a foreigner from New York, trapped in an ivory tower.
I think that's a terrible mistake. The commissioner has taken this task on very reluctantly. It's nothing that he gets any joy or pleasure out of at all. It's an extremely difficult and agonizing time for him, but he has a job to do. He's pledged to do that job, and he certainly wants to go on and do it, but I think his role has been widely misunderstood in Cincinnati, and frankly, I think that's a good reason why we should be in federal court and here in Columbus.
Rose's lawyer, Robert Stackler, spent much of his time saying the Reds should be every bit as much of a defendant as Giamatti. He said the Reds belong in the lawsuit because the Reds, not Giamatti, would actually be the ones to fire Rose if he's banned from baseball. And that, he says, would be a breach of Rose's 2-year, $1 million contract with the team. Now, Judge Holshoe is saying that after hearing both sides, the case deserves careful attention. That is legal shorthand for saying any final decision is going to take a while. He says he's going to try and reach this decision by a week from this coming Monday, the end of the month. Live in Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5. Norma?
Steve, just to get this straight, who wins depending on which way Holshoe rules?
It's kind of complicated, Norma. If the judge says it stays in federal court, that's a clear victory for baseball. If, on the other hand, he sends it back to Hamilton County Common Pleas Court, back to Judge Nadel, Rose's lawyers are going to be very, very happy.
And, of course, we'll continue to follow this. Obviously, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process, and we'll keep following it every inch. Columbus lawyers for both.
Columbus, Denise.
Yeah, we'll be looking for that one.
Came down. He's there now live. Steve, what's this one mean?
Well, it means that the decision shoots a big hole through what's been the major thrust of Rose's defense, as well as his efforts to keep the case before Hamilton County Common Pleas Judge Norbert Nadel. It says when you boil down this case, the argument is between Rose and Commissioner Giamatti and nobody else. And that is what Rose's defenders did not want to hear. The decision is a clear defeat for Rose. 2 weeks ago, his lawyers had argued that the case belonged in state, not federal court, saying the Reds were a necessary defendant, as necessary as Commissioner Giamatti himself. But Judge John Holshoe says in today's decision that Rose fraudulently made the Reds a defendant in the case. He writes, in reality, there is no controversy between Rose and the Cincinnati Reds. Thus, he says, the case belongs in federal court.
I'm very pleased. It would surprise you if I were not, I'm sure, but I'm very pleased.
Giamatti's lawyer, Lou Hoynes, got the good news here in Columbus. He called Holshoe's decision perfectly correct. But in Cincinnati, Rose's lawyer and friend Reuben Katz issued a statement saying, we have not yet reviewed Judge Holshoe's extensive opinion. We will do so in the next day or so. Then we will decide on our course of action. Probably include an appeal to the 6th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. So the irony here is that the case will probably come back to Cincinnati sometime very soon, although definitely not to the courtroom that Rose would have liked. Reporting live in Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5.
Steve, what happens to that order that the Reds are prevented from taking any disciplinary action against Pete? What happens to that now?
It's going to be extended for 2 weeks to August 14th by Judge Holshoe's orders. That would probably be the day, if there's no appeal, that the hearing on the preliminary injunction would go before Judge Holshoe.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. Of course, we're still gathering reaction to this big decision, and we'll have that for you on News 5 coming up at 6.
Just now, he's been listening to a lot of the comments and is here now to share them with us.
Talk about deja vu, huh?
Yeah.
Just how many rulings now for Pete? It seems countless. We've had court rulings on Pete, it seems like all summer long. The whole legal battle starting to become as long as the season itself. And the arguments are becoming as familiar as the starting lineup. Now, here's what everyone is saying today.
Right off the bat, the reaction from Pete is pretty predictable. Here's his quote. "I want an impartial decision maker. The rest is up to the lawyers. Today's decision doesn't affect me one way or the other." The other main player in all this, the baseball commissioner, Bart Giamatti, had this to say.
Well, I've always thought it belonged in the federal courts, and so I think that that's the appropriate place.
Is this a setback for Pete?
Well, I think it is a setback for Pete Rose in that it delays the issue of whether or not this is heard in state court. The interesting thing about Judge Holshue's ruling is that he has allowed Pete Rose's attorneys to appeal his decision.
When asked about that today, Pete's attorney, Reuven Katz, would only make this statement, and it's a quote. "We have not yet reviewed Judge Holshue's extensive opinion. We will do so in the next day or so. Then we will decide on our next course of action." Meanwhile, the public seems to want this over with.
I think it'll get a fair review now that it's in federal court, and there won't be as much, let's call it community pressure, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
I think they're just stalling for time. His lawyers are just stalling for time.
I think that it should go to federal court. I hope that everything comes out as fairly as possible and back Pete all the way.
One more reaction we need to pass along, this from Marge Schott, who says she just hopes the situation is resolved soon and that the players and fans can get back to enjoying the game of baseball, which I think is pretty much a universal acclamation. How realistic, I don't know. It will go on at least until the 14th of August.
The amazing thing here is all this legal stuff has to do with whether and who's going to find out whether or not Giamatti is biased or not. None of this has to do with whether or not Pete gambled on baseball.
And it certainly doesn't preclude the deal that we've been talking about here tonight that may or may not come off before this thing goes back
to his court.
That's from the federal case. And the story over the weekend. It quotes Pete as saying he bet sports other than baseball with the bookie, saying it was more of a convenience than anything else. He admitted it may be illegal, but said, "I'm not the only one who's doing something wrong." Bart Giamatti's assistant commissioner, Faye Vincent, says they may have to take new action against Rose, adding Rose's admissions, if it were any other person, would be subject to actions by baseball. Well, News 5 spoke with Pete Rose today about that article. He says he doesn't understand all the uproar. He was only elaborating on deposition testimony that was already made public. His only regret is using the word convenient.
Rose's lawyers say next week they'll appeal the decision by a federal judge to keep Rose's case against Giamatti in federal court and not send it back to Hamilton County instead. Rose, of course, says Giamatti is too biased to hear charges that Rose bet on Reds games. If the charges are true, Pete could be kicked out of the major leagues for life. But the big story in Reds baseball today is an unbelievable amount of runs they scored in just one inning of this afternoon's game.
They scored 14, count them, 14 times on a major league record of 16 hits, all before the second inning even started. News 5 sports director Ken Broo joins us to show us how they pulled off such an incredible home run spree, and it was incredible.
It'll teach me to be 5 minutes late because I missed the first 4 runs. You had to be there to believe it. It took the Reds 5 games to score 14 runs this past week. It took them only 38 minutes to get the same amount of players across the plate today.
And there's another hit. For a team that's been desperate for runs, the Reds got a bucketful today. 18 in all, 14 in the first inning alone. Todd Benzinger had 4 hits, Jeff Reed had 4, and Ken Griffey drove in 4 runs, 3 here, and that ball is out of here. That ball is way out of here. It was 14-0 after the first inning. How good was it? The Reds not only batted around twice in that inning, every batter got a hit. In fact, 7 of them got 2 hits in that inning. And the 16 hits the Reds had in the first inning, it broke a modern-day Major League record. And for the 20,000-plus who showed up today, this was like the oasis after a desert full of losses.
The best inning I've ever seen. It was awesome. Bing, bing, bing. One run after the other.
I'm enjoying it. I'm going back in and see the rest of it. I think they're just going to build on this. Real impressive, for sure.
Tom Browning went all the way to win it in the best day at the ballpark this season.
We'll have more on this game coming up tonight at 5:30 and again at 6 o'clock. The Reds still a chunk behind in the National League West, but a great day at the ballpark to say the least.
A couple more days like this, maybe they could make it up. They put a burr under the Cincinnati Reds saddle.
Well, you know, the thing is the way those guys were pitching today. I mean, it was like Jim Millett out there, you know, at batting practice time, just kind of grooving them in. I'm not I'm not completely convinced that you and I couldn't have had 3 or 4 hits today if we were out there.
Certainly not you, Mr.
I could be convinced of that perhaps at a later date, but right now I'm open to anything. If I wasn't there myself, I wouldn't have believed it. But as we say in the business, the videotapes don't lie. 18-2, the Reds win. All I could think of sitting down there today was save it. I mean, cut it off at 10 and save it for the weekend. But it doesn't work that way, and so be it. It was a quasi-legendary performance. Ken Griffey, 3-run homer, deep to right center field. You can kiss it goodbye. All right, we'll stay in the first inning. Jeff Reed, 4 hits today. This single to right. Rolando Rooms comes in and scores. The Reds are up 5-0.
It's just a lot of fun, you know. I mean, everybody's going to the plate hitting, you know, and everybody's joking around, having a good time. We're scoring runs, and it's just a fun time.
Still the first. Jim Clancy lifted after the Reds score 7. He didn't get anybody out. Bob Force comes in. He was awful, too. Still the first. Todd Benzinger laces the double down the right field line. Rooms, Griffey, Davis all score. The Reds have a 13-0 lead. They had 14 runs and 16 hits in the first inning alone. Look at the dugout. They were having fun. Even Pete was able to smile. Let's go to the 7th. Rooms here, and you can pucker and plant it because that baby's been kissed. Dead center field. Benzinger scores in front of Rooms, and the Reds are up 17-2, and Rooms was having a great day today.
Oh, we were like, Jesus, that guy slapped somebody else's hand. And they just kept on going back and forth. It was like, you know, anybody make out, get fined. You know, we were having fun for a change. You know, it's been a long time since we can go out there and have some fun.
Tom Browning, he was aces. He went the entire 9, didn't walk a batter, struck out 1, gets Alex Trevino to fly out to right to end it. 18-2. Browning says with that big of a lead, all he had to do was throw strikes.
You know, you just try to go out there and do whatever you can. When you got that big a lead, you just want to go out there and throw strikes and get them out as quick as possible. And, you know, because I knew they didn't feel like they had a chance of coming back to win. And I just, like I said, I just tried to go out there and stay aggressive and throw strikes.
Listen to these records that went down today, okay? Major League records. Most hits in 1 inning, 16. Most batters with 2 hits in 1 inning, 7 Reds did it today. Most batters with 3 or more hits for the game. That ties a Major League record with 7. And the Reds set a club record today, most runs in 1 inning. No Reds team has ever scored more than what they did today, 14. Now, here's another record they set. Most singles in 1 inning. They had 12. Major League record. Pete never saw anything like it. Never.
I think we had 7 guys get 2 hits in the first inning.
Yeah.
We had one guy had a chance of getting 3. Quinones.
Vented some pens.
Said Pete in an upcoming Penthouse magazine article. The story due out next week claims Rose hid a lot of his income from the IRS and hung around with known drug dealers. No comment today from the Rose camp or Janszen.
Next story is very tragic here.
With agents who want to know more about Pete and the way he made and spent his money. News 5 Steve Forrest shows us what they're up to.
2 sources tell me that Rose is again the target of IRS investigators. Baseball special investigator John Dowd has already interviewed them. But I'm told the IRS is now following up, trying to get more information for the grand jury probe into whether Rose avoided paying income taxes. But today an IRS spokeswoman refused to confirm the latest investigation. On another front, Rose is now confirming his apparent flip-flop on whether he owned part of a winning pick-6 jackpot from Turfway Park earlier this year. At first, Rose denied owning it, even at a meeting with Commissioner Bart Giamatti in February. But he since admitted it, and in a radio interview broadcast this morning, Rose hints he may have deliberately misled Giamatti.
And what I said is I don't believe it was any of the commissioner's business if I bet part of a pick-6, to be honest with you. I didn't have my hand on no Bible.
Now, later in the same interview, Rose accuses Giamatti and former Commissioner Peter Ueberroth of telling him to lie to reporters about that meeting in February. Rose says he was told to tell the writers that he was asked for help on baseball matters, and not to mention gambling.
Well, what's the reaction to all of this from baseball?
No comment. I spoke with the Deputy Commissioner Fay Vincent today. He says, I'm just not going to get into that.
This case seems to get murkier and murkier as time goes on.
Yeah, there's nothing else you can say.
All right, Steve, thanks a lot. Well, Pete's chief accuser is finally speaking out in public, saying Rose cared more about gambling than his family, or even whether he won or lost. Paul Janszen is quoted in this month's edition of Penthouse magazine. He says Rose told him, quote, "Paulie, what would there be in life without gambling? What would people do for fun?" Janszen is also quoted as saying he thought baseball had passed Rose by. He needed something, Janszen.
There's no deal. Baseball's apparently had enough and wants to move against Rose now. This letter sent to federal judge John Holshoe earlier this month says it is the commissioner's present intention to commence his hearing on August 17, 1989. That's a week from this Thursday, and it's just 3 days after the agreement not to take any disciplinary action against Rose expires. Rose's lawyers are understandably trying to stop Giamatti's maneuver, arguing that any action taken against the Reds manager for allegedly betting on baseball, quoting, will forever brand Pete Rose as dishonest in the public's eyes, particularly in the eyes of the youth of America, whether or not Giamatti's decision is ultimately reversed. They're asking that the agreement not to take any action be kept in place while the legal process goes on. Now, Rose's lawyer, Robert Stackler, left in one direction while Hoynes was going out the other. He was ultimately not available for comment. Baseball PR spokesman Rich Levin says he doesn't know anything about the letter that you just saw. He says that it may be just lawyers being lawyers. A lot of people here are saying it's a lot more than that. Reporting live in Columbus, Steve Forrest, News 5.
Steve, any word on when the judge is going to rule on this one?
No word at all, but it has to be pretty quickly because if no decision's issued by August 17th, then Giamatti has said we're going to go ahead with that disciplinary hearing against Pete Rose.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. Of course, we'll continue in court today asking a judge to protect Pete from an August 17th disciplinary hearing on gambling allegations before Giamatti. If that meeting were to take place, Giamatti could kick Rose out of baseball or suspend him for a year. There's no telling when federal judge John Holshoe will decide whether to stop that August 17th meeting. And that's not the only new development in the Pete Rose case. You can now buy yourself a copy of what Pete's main accusers say about him.
It's that article we've been telling you about, just out on newsstands in the latest issue of Penthouse magazine. Sports director Ken Broo is here to tell us how it's selling here in Cincinnati. Ken?
Well, I guess there is some truth that people read Penthouse for the articles. It's an article by Paul Janszen, who's got a heck of a lot to say about Pete's love affair with gambling. And now, as they say in the press, you can read all about it.
Penthouse may be a hot magazine full of pictures as far as some people are concerned, but at least one article in this month's issue is going to catch the eyes of a lot of Cincinnati Reds fans. It's finally on the newsstands, the article in which Pete's...
Tonight at this time, we were